I would say every team's unique. And can we focus on this year's team and who we want to be? What's our identity? What's our second scorecard? How do we decide who we want to be? But can we buy into some standards that we want to be known for this year? Not next year's team, not last year's team. Because if you can combine the culture of the coaches along with the athletes that are there that year, they start passing down the culture year to year rather than, well, those are coach's words or that's coach's theme. And that doesn't mean it's not important. It's very important. But when they take ownership, now we have a way to talk about it.
Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. I am your host and coach, Tyler Johnson. And whether you've tuned in to elevate your mindset, your game, or just your day, you are in the right place. My guest this episode is a psychiatrist with over 25 years of experience, 20 of which are in high-performance coaching. He's the founder of Maxout Your Mindset, and he's worked with CEOs, military leaders, Olympians, and athletes of all levels, from youth to professional. Please welcome to the Elev8 podcast, Dr. Larry Widman. Dive right in. Max out your mindset. I think mental game, people that are listening, how do we go about that?
Well, that's not a one size fits all, obviously, but I do believe that you can train your mind like any physical skill. I'm an absolute believer in that, and I think there's a process to that. So I always start with, why do we train our mind? And it doesn't take very long for an athlete or a coach to recognize the mental contribution to their sport. And then in some moments, like being down 1 point with a second to go at the free throw line, if you hit your free throws, we win the state championship. If not, we go home. Those free throws feel a little bit more mental than maybe when you're up 15 with a minute to go. So, I try to get the athletes and coaches to understand why we train our mind. And they're the ones that tell me that it's between 40 to 80% mental in normal moments, and maybe as high as 100% in certain moments of sport, maybe kicking the game-winning field goal, for example. And then I think it's really important to get into what we train and how we train it. So when you say max out mindset or max out your mindset, I think there's some things we can train. I call them the building blocks of an elite mindset. And we train goal setting, self-talk, which is a critical component of performance, and arousal control, mindfulness about getting our nervous system right for the big moments and learning how to stay present or moving on to the next moment or the next play. And the skill of visualization, those are all what I call our building blocks, leading to the way our framework is at Max Out Mindset. We think we can train 4 C's. We can train what commitment looks like. And commitment allows us to then train confidence, train concentration, which is part focus, equal parts refocus, and we can train composure, staying calm, cool, and collected in the big moments. And I think each one of those C's can be trained like any physical skill, and those are things that I'm happy to take a dive into. But when you say, what is it? Those are what we can train. And when you get good at training confidence, concentration, and composure, now we have a chance to max out.
Yeah, I like that. I want to dive into one or two things you brought up there. One, I love how you brought up the pressure, and it can feel different situationally, what the context is. It may be competition, and kids feel a lot of pressure from a lot of different places, their own, their parents, their coaches, their peers. Let's dive into pressure. How can we kind of, do you put that under your composure? Or how does that cross over into how do we help them understand that, there is a privilege that we always get talked about with pressure, that kind of piece. And then how do we stay composed when we're feeling it?
Yeah. So the honest opinion from me is it starts with commitment, which is preparation and hard work. Commitment to me is what I call my 4 legs of the elite performance stool. There's a physical leg. Most athletes are familiar with that, strength and conditioning and diet and hydration and all that stuff. And there's a technical component, the skills that you have to be great at. There's a tactical component, watching film, knowing the scout or the game plan. And then there's the mental part, which is, the 4 C's that we're talking about, and also taking care of your mental well-being. But I always say that if you want to be able to deal with pressure and stay calm and turn it into a privilege, then you better have the answers to the test. You have got to put in the work. And it's now there's going to be moments and times where it's not that hard to be confident or composed. But the athletes and teams that I'm often around that have these big goals, I always tell them that at some point you have to look across the net or across the court and go, we're taking them down today. And without commitment, truly training what it looks like to be all in, not just the hardest worker in the gym or the weight room, but taking care of your sleep, knowing the game plan and all those components, it's going to be really hard to attack 2, 3, and 4, meaning confidence, concentration, and composure in the big moments and under pressure. So it all falls apart without commitment. So when you say, how do you deal with pressure? You're right. It is about composure. But first it goes, did I train it? Do I have the answers to the test? And then it goes into confidence, because without commitment, the first, I have a lot of ingredients of confidence, but it all starts with preparation again. Where do we get our confidence from? It's really, really hard to stay composed if you're not confident. So it's sort of, they kind of blend together, attacking commitment, which helps us, among some other things, train confidence. That's a whole separate topic. But if we can train confidence, the outcome goal for me is you can be fearless. And it doesn't mean you won't have nerves in big moments. You're just not afraid because I put in the work. I know how to talk to myself. My teammates and coaches know how to pick me up and so forth. And then there is this overlap with composure, meaning there are some things that you need to learn that you can train with composure. Have you learned some tactical breathing techniques? Do you know the skill of visualization and how to use that to stay calm? Do my teammates and coaches, or do I have a battle buddy who knows how to sort of settle me down or get me in the right mind space if I'm too hyped up? But they blend together. But there's a little bit of overlap in terms of things that you can train to isolate things like composure, because I'm a big believer that pressure can turn into excitement or a privilege, or pressure can turn into fear. And it's the fear is when we're not prepared, and we know we're not prepared. And now we're in a tough situation, and I know, having put in the work, I've cheated the process.
Yeah, I love how you back it up to the commitment, and you brought up in there sleep. Like, I think sometimes with young people, it's like you can have all these great tools, but if if we're not taking care of some of the well-being, the commitment there, we can't visualize ourselves, and recover fast enough to get where we want to do. So I love that commitment. The other thing I love you to share a little bit more about is the self-talk.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of times when I ask young people, like, that doubtful voice in your head and all the hands go up, and then a little unsure, a little less if we want to, the one that talks to ourselves as they are doing it and thinking about it. But can you talk to us more about how we can help athletes develop a healthy self-talk and a resilient self-talk?
Yeah, self-talk by far to me is the number one mental skill that high performers struggle with. At all levels, from high school all the way up to the professionals and Olympians I work with. It's by far the biggest challenge. It's the number one thing that's tied into a deterioration in confidence as well. And so they're completely linked. And so first off, I talk a lot about awareness and strategy. A lot of athletes I work with, elite athletes, they'll use the word acknowledgement. First, you got to be aware. My self-talk is really hurting me right now. What I'm saying to myself is impacting me in a negative way. And then you have to have a strategy to deal with it. So I call it awareness and strategy. No different than if your heart is pounding. Like, you got to be aware first that your heart is really pounding and you're way too hyped up, but then you better have a strategy to cope with it. So with self-talk, first we got to be aware of, what is my self-talk like? Is it helpful? Is it hurtful? What do I even say to myself in good times or in bad? And then we better have some strategies. And I'm a big believer that there's multiple ways to attack self-talk. And I will never accept from a student athlete in high school, nothing works for me. Nothing may have worked yet, but there's several options. And I think first off, it helps them, it gives them a lot of comfort when they recognize that the elite athletes in this world, in most sports, struggle with self-talk. So now I'm not mentally broken or weak. It's something that most struggle with. It's just that the best do something about it. So now we bought that into, like, you're not a weak person. You're not a broken person. Self-talk, negative self-talk, when I tell myself I suck and I'm no good and coach shouldn't even be playing me and why did I even get a scholarship? No wonder your confidence is low in the next moment. So acknowledging that it's normal. The best do something about it. Then I try to break it down. There's only a few things you can do. You can come up with positive mantras. Some athletes love them, some don't. I'm the best. I'm a hard worker. I deserve to be here. I'm made for these moments. All kinds of phrases, right? I'm the best outside hitter in the country. Like some people like those, and a lot of my high performing perfectionists can't stand them. They're like, it's just stupid. It doesn't make sense to me. It feels like I'm bragging. I would never say that to myself. And so, but for a lot of athletes, it works all very well. All right, motivational words, right? Can't wait to show that coach, on that team how good I am. Or I can't wait to show them why, what they missed by not recruiting me. Or, I put in the work. I'm made for these moments. I can't wait to show people what I can do. There's motivational words and positive mantras. They can overlap.
Yeah.
And then I have what I think a lot of athletes aren't aware of is the power of what I call performance words or instruction words. Maybe they're called technical words. Golf, they might be called swing thoughts. And it's a very powerful form of self-talk. It's just not telling yourself great things about yourself. It's feet forward, elbow up, eyes. You're telling your brain's telling your body the one or two things that help you execute that skill. Slow to fast. Like there's a lot of different phrases. So I'll ask athletes, what's the key to your success there in, serving that ball across the net for you? For some, it's their toss. For some, it's keeping their elbow up. For some, it's hand contact. And so I try to get them to think about the one or two things that will help them execute their skill, stay present while doing it rather than going, I hope I don't hit this next one long, or my gosh, the last one went into the net, or I shot an air ball. It doesn't matter the sport. Focus on that one or two key words that help you execute. So they do two things. It's a form of positive self-talk in a way, rather than telling myself, I hope I don't miss. Two, it helps you stay present and focused because you're focusing on one thing to do rather than thinking about the past or the future. So I think that's a very powerful form of self-talk. A lot of perfectionists prefer using those words. And then the last one I would tell you, I don't know if it's true self-talk. I call it getting external. Getting out of your own head and celebrating a teammate, talking to a teammate about anything, sometimes about your sport, something about strategy, sometimes telling them a joke, making them laugh. And instead of being stuck in your head, you get external and speak to somebody else. So you're actually speaking, but it is talk. And all those things allow us to have an awareness that my self-talk's hurting me, but more, how do I replace it? Positive mantras work for some. Motivational work for some. Performance words work for some. Getting external work for some. And I won't allow someone to tell me nothing works for me. We're going to find something that helps you get out of your head to allow for mistake recovery so that you can be confident in the next moment, even if the last moment was really bad.
Yeah, I like that you brought up the external. I think a coach shared with me once, if you can't think of something for yourself, the default is be a great teammate.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when we start to see and celebrate others, our celebrations will come our way versus putting those resistance. On the flip side of maxing out our mindset, in the very distracted student athlete world, what are some of the things you observe that quickly, poor habits or things that often sometimes, like we talked about, maybe weaken that commitment or lack their better words, start to minimize our mindset and our power that we can take control?
Yeah. So, when I'm working with teams, we talk a lot about attitude and effort, and I show them a graph where I have attitude and effort and positive energy inside the circle. And I ask them why they're inside the circle, and athletes quickly tell me those are controllables, and I tell them I agree with that. I said, but here's the deal. Like what I tell them, if you're a high performer or a perfectionist or both, let's think about what we take a lot of pride in your sport, in school, in life. We take a lot of pride in attitude and effort. So I asked them to think about what's the number one reason that a high performer attitude and effort starts to deteriorate, which leads to negative mindset. And sometimes they get it right away and sometimes they don't, but I tell them it's usually something going on in their world outside of their sport. And And can we give our teammates grace instead of going, "Hey, what is wrong with her again today? I wonder what's going on with her." And I just say if attitude and effort is often a high performer, it's usually because they're getting punched in life. Not always. We've all met the negative Nellies in this world that are just downers. But most high performers, if attitude and effort is off for an hour or a practice or a day, usually something's going on. Maybe they got maybe some really disappointing home life stuff. Maybe they're in a tough relationship right now. Maybe school's gotten hard. And then if you tie it to the sport, another reason people break down on commitment is I don't have the role that I want. I'm disappointed in the role I currently have. I thought I was going to have the role, a different one. I was starting finally after 2 years, and now I've been pulled. Now, am I going to do the things I said I was going to do commitment wise? Sometimes Inky Johnson said, long after the emotion I said it in left me, right? Meaning I raised my hand. I said I would do this for my team. I would take extra reps. I would get my sleep. But now I'm disappointed in my role. Or, like I said, something really is hard going on at home. Parents are going through a divorce. My boyfriend's being a jerk or my girlfriend. Like, there's lots of things that are going on that can deteriorate attitude and effort that also translate into commitment deterioration, my mindset going very negative. And so I'm a big believer in checking those things out first and trying to figure out why is somebody deteriorated. There's usually a why behind it. And then seeing if we can help them bring it back to maybe the values or the standards that we agreed upon on our team. When we were feeling a little bit different. Does that make sense? So there's a lot of distractions today, and them. Social media is a big one, to be honest, for a lot of athletes that we're talking about in the high school and college space. I mean, people's opinions of them, what people say about them. I keep telling them that social media is the bane of a perfectionist, and I get the cool parts of it, but I would say their rational mind knows that what they're seeing on social media oftentimes isn't real. It's fake.
Yeah.
Their emotional brain takes over and goes, she's prettier, she's smarter, that she's taller, she's thinner, that house party looks more fun, that house vacation looks better than mine. And it's so easy to compare, and a lot of it's misguided because we know you can put filters and present your best life. So social media has a lot of negative opinions about people, and you add in that piece, which I never had to deal with. Maybe you did, but it just didn't exist in my time. And so, I said, if people were upset with me or something and they went to a party without me, I probably would never know about it. But now today, they go to things and take pictures and make sure that the ones that they left out on purpose, see it and feel it. And so it's really hard today for a high performer. And that's another reason I think that mindset deteriorates is they allowed outside factors, other people's opinions, social media to deteriorate, their mental space.
Yeah, definitely. You've been doing this a long time with athletes. What's something that you see that's more new, something that's changed, and then something that's still been the same since you started? You had to think about it.
Yeah, I mean, confidence is when again, I'm taking the top athletes in the world to high school and thinking, all right, where are the similarities? The things that they struggle with the most that has not changed is self-talk and confidence. They are linked. I mean, composure is a little bit of that, but it's self-talk and confidence. When you really ask if they're in struggle at all, or what's the first thing that tends to break down? It's confidence. And so that hasn't changed. I think our ability to, I hope anyways, train it, and making people aware that we can train confidence rather than, the old notion of a coach telling you, I need you to be mentally tougher right now, or I need you to relax. And, the athlete would say, well, I think in their mind, if I knew how to be mentally tougher right now, coach, don't you think I would be? But then if they ask the coach, well, how do I relax, coach? Or how do I be tougher? The coach would often respond by going, I don't know, but figure it out or you're not going to play. Instead of going, we can train how to relax better. We can train mental resilience, which I would call grit, or some people call mental toughness. I like mental resilience, but we can train those skills to focus and refocus and reset. And so that hasn't changed. I think our ability and what's gotten better, at least from my standpoint, is explaining the why behind it and then the what and the how. The thing that I've noticed that they are struggling the most with by far, um, it's not wanting to let people down. And
Mm,
it's they are so worried about letting their teammates down. They're so worried about letting their parents down, worried about, letting other people down in their world. And, as club sports have gotten bigger and the money that's gotten bigger and then the amount of money that their parents may spend, they start to feel really guilty when they're underperforming, or if they're starting to feel burned out and go, I waited my whole life to get this scholarship at this great school, and I don't think I want to play my sport anymore. But everyone's invested in so much in me, and I don't know if I could afford to go to school without this. And that's all anyone asks me about is, oh, can't wait to go to Nebraska or Creighton, some of the schools I'm around. And they're thinking, I'm already over it. And I think they worry so much about letting their teammates down today. And again, there's a lot of reasons behind that. But I think I've noticed that probably more than anything in the last year or two is just the number of athletes that just really struggle with getting down on themselves, and they're more worried about their impact on their teammates when they fall short. Maybe they're not playing well in that game. So, and then I think the role of parents has changed. I mean, parents obviously are awesome. They're everything. I mean, they're cool, and parents mean well. I've rarely been around a parent that doesn't mean well,
right.
but in the worst possible moments, sometimes I tell athletes, right? Your parent's going to say to you, and they mean well, I tell them, you're the best point guard on that team. You should be the starting pitcher. Like coaches playing favorites. And I always tell the athlete that will never get you to start. All that does is cause you stress and everyone else. And you got to be able to tell your parents, look, I want to be out there too, but I'm going to work with my coach to figure out what I need to get better at and why I'm not out there, rather than buying into, you're right, I am the best player out there. I should be out there. And now that's brings negativity to yourself and everyone else. And so I think the parents giving their input to the athletes and the coaches more, it comes from a place of love, but it's often misguided in the sense that it ends up causing more stress for everybody.
Yeah.
And to put more power into the athlete to go, you've got to have the courage to talk to your parents about how they can help or hurt your confidence. Or, hey, I agree with you, but you know what? I'm going to focus on what I can do to get better rather than buying into your friends and family and the loved ones who want to tell you you should be out there. Because that leads to a lot of problems. So I think the parent involvement compared to a generation ago, calling coaches, giving them input, posting things on message boards, I think that all creates a lot of stress for our athletes. And a lot of times I don't think the parents recognize, I don't think they realize it or they probably wouldn't do it as much.
Yeah, I've definitely seen instance where parent posted about on message board and coaching staff knew before kid ever knew. And
Hmm.
it's like put them in put young people in a bad position.
Hmm.
um it, it,
Tough.
yeah, it's like why did that parent even do that? But in going back to doing this work for a while, what led you into doing it, and where do you get your most joy in the work that you do?
Yeah, I mean, I have, well, I mean, to backtrack, I'm actually a psychiatrist by trade and
Mhm.
training. So I went to medical school.
Okay.
So my path is actually quite a bit different than how most people might get into whatever you call it, elite mindset training. I mean, there's a huge sports psychology component to this. And, but you don't necessarily have to be a psychologist. And of course, like I said, I'm medically trained, but over time, I just really found that I enjoyed working with high performers, whether it was running an addiction unit, working with some military personnel who couldn't be on medication, for example, and you needed to teach them skills to stay focused and calm and to maybe manage stress. So I was always sort of interested in the wellness model or, and how do you help people even rather than taking sick people and making them better, I'd rather take a high performer who's here and take them to here. They still have a ways to go, and maybe they've even dipped into into struggle or a slump, but their ceiling is really high. And everyone has different people that they like to work with. I found out I really like high performers. They're motivated, they're committed, I like to see, and so it ties into what gives me my joy. And it's the three things that I ask of every athlete in every team. Again, from a rural high school, to the Omaha Supernovas, a professional team, or some of the Olympians I get to work with every day. Um, can you get to the end of your year and have no regrets,
Mm.
right? Which is what I mean, the pain of regret, meaning if you fall short of your goal, it's not because of something you had control over, like selfishness or drama, or you cheated the process, so no regrets. Um, if and can you get to the end of your year and put yourself in a position to max out? Because I tell people it's very different. Like sometimes you can do everything impossible and you still fall short. And it's okay to clap and celebrate for the other team, but there's nothing more painful than watching that other team do a court rush when you know your team was better than them. But we let lots of things get in our way, like drama or role acceptance, and then of course if you're on a team, but even if it's an individual, can you get to the end of the year and hypothetically not want to take your jersey off? The
Yeah.
teams that don't want to take off their jerseys. So when teams buy into that and they tell me, I slept in my jersey. I didn't want to take it off last night. This is the best year I've ever had. Now, maybe they reached their goal and maybe they didn't. But when they say this was the coolest year of my life in sports, right? And we didn't want the season to end because I call it failure, even if a team does pretty well. But in their heart of hearts, they can't wait to be away from each other and move on to the next sport or to club or from high school to club, high school to club and go, you know what? Everyone's telling us what a great year we had, but I hated it.
Mhm.
We had cliques on our team. People were mean. The coaches were jerks. And I'm like, if you can get to the end of that year and you've built your connections and your relationships to the point that you give anything to play together one more day or practice together another week, that's where I get my joy. I get my joy out of watching teams max out. And I tell people I've only cried a half a dozen times probably watching teams that I work with. I mean, certainly Nebraska volleyball winning the national championship, but probably my favorite moment was honestly a small rural school in Nebraska called Waverly, and Nebraska in volleyball they had reached the district finals 5 years in a row, the one game before state, which is kind of a goal for a lot of high level teams. And I worked with them that year, and they worked really, really hard on their mental game. And that didn't mean they got to make it to state. They had great coaches, great athletes. But when they did their court rush, to make it to state, I still get a little emotional about it because those small teams, just to watch their excitement, watch the way they were just so happy for each other, even the non-starters, and
Yeah.
watching the parents and the coaches trying to reach a goal for so long, and it's because they put in the work. Like to me, it doesn't matter what level it is. Like when you see a team have that kind of joy, I mean, what else can you ask for, right? And then, I mean, obviously it's tied to mental well-being, I mean, if I can help them with some mental skills that help them in their sport, that I know that helps them in their relationships with their parents and their teachers and coaches, boyfriends, girlfriends, and they know how to manage their triggers better. They know how to stay present more. They've learned mindfulness techniques. They know how to stay calm under stress. And that gives me the joy when I hear from them a year later, 2 years later, 5 years later, going, this stuff helped me be a great college athlete, or it's helped me be great at my work, or I'm so much better with my kids today than I used to be. I have more patience. Well, then, of course, that's where the joy comes from. It's not the winning and the losing. It's watching teams approach max out or improve in their individual and their worlds and their mindset.
I love it. Those lasting ripple effects.
Mhm.
Um, you brought it up a little bit in kind of the role challenges that can be on a team. You brought up earlier the term, I'd love to hear a little bit more about it, having a battle buddy, someone that's kind of there for you. But when we see youth sports, you see, yeah, you brought up kind of the more industrial money that's behind it, kind of a more transient, sometimes team to team culture that comes from the youth. And then in college, we've got the NIL and the portal and can kind of go wherever you want as you please. Um, and high school sports are kind of and yeah, you can transfer and sometimes things like that. But in what's become a more transient world in sports to kind of keep and build cultures, uh, how can we how can coaches bring people together and accept different roles uh, and do what used to be maybe seem like we had a couple years to do it. Now you've got to probably do it in a couple months.
Yeah, I mean it comes down to culture and setting the standards for your team. And of course, coaches have a standard that they recruit to. But what's really helped me with teams is I ask teams to come up with their own values for the year. They sit on top of the coaches. Maybe a coach has themes or words that they recruit to that are their non-negotiables that probably get you kicked off if you can't live. But I would say every team's unique. And can we focus on this year's team and who we want to be? What's our identity? What's our second scorecard? How do we decide who we want to be? And maybe they come up with words like trust, and they want to be fearless, and family. There's lots of words. Some are really clever with what they come up with. But can we buy into some standards that we want to be known for this year? Not next year's team, not last year's team. Because if you can combine the culture of the coaches along with the athletes that are there that year, they start passing down the culture year to year rather than, well, those are coaches' words or that's coach's theme. And that doesn't mean it's not important. It's very important. But when they take ownership, now we have a way to talk about it. Like, hey, you guys are the ones that said that, you were going to live, the family word this year, and you defined it as this, and this. How we live in that, right? And it's so much easier for a coach to go, hey, you picked relentless as your top theme for the year, and you partly define that as never letting a ball drop in practice. Now a coach can go, hey, what's going on? Are you guys relentless today? Rather than go, yeah, coach always brings that up after we struggle on the weekend, or, instead of going, hey, it's your word, not ours, like you picked it. And so I think it really helps when you can get a team to buy into a set theme or some words for that year that they've picked, they've defined. Now they can hold each other accountable to those. Because if you can't figure out the mixture of love and accountability, both as a coach and then on the team, if you're a team leader, we either end up with a team that's joyless because it's all about accountability, or you have a team that's just really soft because it's only about joy and fun. Figuring out how do you love your teammates but also hold them accountable is by far the hardest challenge I've seen as late for coaches and athletes. And so when you combine that with building relationships, when you really say, well, how do you do it? You have to build the relationships. And so many coaches today I work with, they think their athletes don't want the relationship. Oh, they don't want to get to know me. And that doesn't mean they need to know your deepest, darkest secrets, but athletes want to get to know their coaches better. And it can be as simple as going to the training table with them and having lunch with them instead of always calling them to your office when you want to talk to them. Now they think they're in trouble. And if you can't figure out how to build the connections of relationships through a little bit of vulnerability, then there's no way you can build these teams that want to fight for each other, that want to fight for your teammate, even though that teammate beat you out today. Because I tell them, like, great teams, like, you have to help the teammate who beat you out today be great. But when you help them be great, and if they play great, it hurts your playing time. Yeah. But that's why it's such a weird thing to be on great teams, because you have to be great for your teammate in order for your team to be great. But it might be helping the teammate who beat you out. And you have to still want them to do well. And you can't secretly wish for them to do poorly and hope your team wins so coach plays you. It's a miserable space. So you're constantly working on standards and building connections so that you can hold each other accountable to those standards. If you haven't built the relationships, right? The quote, they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Like, if you haven't built those connections, how do you hold a teammate accountable when they're falling short? Like, they're like, well, she's never talked to me once off the court. Now, before, and now she wants to hold me accountable to something. I don't want to listen to her. So you got to do two things. You got to build connections, and then you also have to model the behaviors you want. Like, you have to show your team, the coaches doing the team leaders, you want our team to be fearless? This is what we do. You want our team to be calm under stress? Then the coach can't lose their mind when the referee or the umpire, makes a bad call. I want you to be calm when they blow the call, but then you lose your mind. So I always tell the team leaders and coaches, if you can't model the behaviors you want for your team, you can't expect them to do it. And so that's probably a lot of pieces to that, but it's part connection, right? And it's part standards. And when you can do both of those, Now we build a culture that's very clear. Who are we? Who do we want to be? How do we help each other when we fall short? And then those teams, they don't have as many kids transfer. Just my experience. They don't have as many kids that want to go somewhere else. They
Sure.
all feel valued top to bottom.
Yeah.
Communication is good. And those are fun teams to be around because you can still do everything well and still have transfers for a lot of different reasons. You want to try to minimize the controllables on that.
Uh, Love it. Uh, as we wrap up, one last question. If I was to give you a magic wand, and in waving this magic wand tomorrow, all the young athletes would wake up with a mental skill or attribute, um, what would you wish upon young athletes?
Yeah, the skill of mindfulness. It's not even close to me. So I always tell them if there's just one thing you could commit to, right, is can you develop some kind of mindfulness practice? And of course, that's a big word. So mindfulness to me means two things. One, it's getting really good at being aware. What am I thinking and what am I feeling? Because if you aren't aware of those, how do you have a strategy to deal with them? Self-talk negative strategy, heart pounding, hands are shaky, breathing technique. Like, so we get really good at being aware of what I'm thinking and feeling. And then the second part of mindfulness is learning how to spend a prolonged period of time in the present moment. And it's never been harder for adults as well. This isn't a kid problem to stay present, right? Our brains are always thinking about the past or the future. And I tell people if you're a high performing perfectionist, we tend to spend way more time in the future worrying about a lot of things we can't control. And that leads to a lot of anxiety. But there's also times to be in the future, goal setting, visualization, planning. But if your brain is out there too far and you're worrying about today's game tonight, but you're in a class that's very important to you, you got to be aware that your brain has drifted to tonight's game and you got to be listening. We got a big test tomorrow. The professors give me the answers. Or if I'm in practice and my brain's drifted to, I got to have a tough conversation with my boyfriend tonight. Or, all right, we got to be aware of that quicker, bring it back to present. So there's to be able to train the skill of mindfulness either through formal techniques like breath meditations or mindfulness meditations, or there's so many informal ones, right? And then I think yoga is a form of that. A lot of athletes, the mindfulness, the focus on the present is your poses and your breath. And it could be progressive muscle relaxation, or it could be knitting before a game, or Stephen Edoracek was doing the Rubik's Cube before the men's gymnastics finals, and doing something that helps you stay present with the focus on when your mind drifts, you're aware of it and you bring it back. So just counting to 20 with your eyes closed and breathe, counting your breaths, by the time you get to 4, you're already thinking, what's for dinner? This is boring. But you got to be aware, I'm supposed to be counting my breaths. Awareness, bring it back. Oh yeah, focus. So think about what we're training besides those other things. We're training focus on something hard and boring, like my breath. I'm distracted. I have to train refocus. Focus, refocus is training the skill of concentration. So we're training concentration, but mindfulness, the last thing I'll say about when you really study the data on mindfulness, people who practice it 5 to 20 minutes a day, 20 is better, calmer under stress, better focus, better memory, and my favorite one, increased kindness. And there is a part of the brain that grows, and there's a part of the brain that shrinks in meditators. We never thought the brain changed later after the age of 21 or 2. And then anyway, some pretty cool studies show that a couple parts of our brain change that align with probably why they've been doing meditation for thousands of years in the Eastern medicine world. And so if they can develop the ability to learn how to stay present and have strategies to bring their brain back to present, it's just such a nicer world to be in. Because if we're out here too much, we're anxious. If we're ruminating about the past, we tend to be pretty down or depressed. And between social media and this 24/7 world, it's never been harder for an adult or a college or high school kid to stay present. And it's the number one skill I think you can learn to have a healthy life is to learn how to be mindful, aware of what I'm thinking and feeling, learning how to stay in the present moment. So that's the skill I wish everybody could have, because with that, high performance in school, sport, and life.